To have Rabbi Leff on Torah Tuesdays, and we've had wonderful speakers from around the world. Rabbi Leff is a person who doesn't need introduction. His influence and his tremendous impact on Klal Yisrael throughout the world over the decades has been significant and very powerful. It's a great zchus, a great honor for us to be hosting him this evening. We thank Rabbi Leff very much for his time, for being with us tonight on Torah Tuesdays. And he'll be speaking tonight on the goal of the Pesach Seder and how to achieve it. Rabbi Leff, over to you.
Thank you. After an introduction like that, I'm afraid to speak. I think you invited somebody else. In any case, let me get to the point right away. What is the purpose of the Seder? It says in the Haggadah, the Chol Dor Vador Chayiv Adam Liros Esatzmo Keilu Hu Yosem Mitzrayim. In every generation, at every Seder, a person has to consider himself as if he personally was a slave in Egypt and went out that night. I've asked this question world over to thousands of people. How many of you at any Seder you've ever been, at the end of the Seder, can really honestly say, I felt like I was a slave in Egypt and I was set free? And no one ever raised their hand, including myself. I didn't ask this of Gedolei Yisrael. In Egypt, I went through Auschwitz, but I told them that has nothing to do with the Seder. That has to do with your personal life. Also, my wife tells me that every year she feels like she was a slave in Egypt, but she's never felt like she went out yet. In any case, but that doesn't count either. In any case, so what is it? Why don't we feel very frustrated and let down at the end of every Seder that again another year went by and we really didn't feel what we're supposed to feel at the end of the Seder, like we were slaves and set free? So I'm going to tell you tonight a few different possibilities of how to understand that, what you're supposed to feel and how, in order that at the end of this year's Seder, you won't feel frustrated and let down, and you'll really feel like you accomplished this and you fulfilled that you feel personally like you were a slave in Egypt and were set free. Start with the first way. The Kuzari asked the following question. He says, we believe what we believe because we have a tradition, an unbroken line of transmission from the people who witnessed what we believe in, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, the giving of the Torah. That's the basis of our religion. How do I know those things happen? Because my parents or somebody from the previous generation who are surrogate parents called teachers told me. How do they know? Because the people of the generation before them told them. And so on, all the way back to the people who are there. That's called a tradition, and that's what we believe in because we have a tradition. But if I had been born a Christian, I'd also have a tradition. My parents or somebody from the previous generation would have told me what the foundations of Christianity were. How do they know? Because their parents told them all the way back to the people who were there. If I had been born a Muslim, I would also have a tradition, right? I would hear from my parents of the foundations of Islam. How do they know? Because their parents told them all the way back to the people who were there. Comes out that we believe what we believe only because of an accident of birth. Everybody has their traditions, and I've been born this way, I believe this tradition, and born a different way, believe a different tradition. Is there any difference between the traditions? Says the Kuzari, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's a tremendous difference. If you trace back the tradition of Christianity or the tradition of Islam, the foundation is very, very weak. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And if the weakest link is the first link, then it's a very, very weak chain. Let's see what the foundations of Christianity are. Someone came and claimed to be the Son of God, claimed to have come atone for the sins of mankind, died, and was resurrected. Okay, those are the foundations of Christianity. How many people witnessed the fact that Yeshua was the Son of God? Nobody. He claimed to be the Son of God. Nobody saw God giving out cigars when he was born, so we don't know for sure if he was the Son of God or not. May have been, may not have been. Take his word, believe him, don't believe him. How about how many people witnessed his resurrection? So the New Testament says itself how many people. There was 11 of his closest disciples who were very biased because if he didn't return, they were out of a job. So they had a vested interest to say he returned. And a group of swooning women, women who were fainting at the time, not to impugn the credibility of women, but swooning women. You can see anything when you're fainting. So that is the entire foundation of Christianity. What one person claimed he was and what a small group of people witnessed. And that's easily falsified, to make it up. And people could accept it. And the Rambam says that God wanted Christianity to spread for his reasons. Islam is even worse. The entire foundation of Islam is that Muhammad claimed to have had a dream in a cave one night, and the angel Gabriel came and revealed to him the Quran and told him to start a new religion. That's it. Nobody videoed the dream. Nobody shared the dream with Muhammad. Maybe he had a dream. Maybe he had a stomach ache. Maybe he had a nightmare. Who knows? But that's his word. Believe it not. Muhammad had a very cogent philosophical argument to convince people to accept his religion. It went something like this: accept my religion or I'll cut off your head. Most people found that to be extremely convincing. So his religion also spread very, very, very quickly. Now, if our religion had started the same way, so it would be on the same level. If Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam had come to the Jewish people settled in Tel Aviv and said to them, look, you got to hear what happened to us. We were backpacking through Egypt, and we were captured and made slaves, and we worked very hard there. And then God brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians, got us out of there. He split the sea for us, drowned the Egyptians, and spoke to us at Har Sinai and gave us the Torah. And here it is, believe us. Then our Torah would be the same tradition of theirs. It's the word of a few people, what they saw, what they witnessed, what they heard, and believe them, don't believe them. That's not what happened. Moshe Rabbeinu did not come and tell the Jewish people, I saw these things. You saw them. You all witnessed the 10 plagues. You all went through the Red Sea when it split. You all heard God speak at Har Sinai. This is something that was purported to have happened in front of an entire nation. Much different foundation. And the Kuzri says, very difficult to falsify something that supposedly happened in front of an entire nation. And I'm going to amplify that now as quickly as I can and explain to you why it's difficult to falsify. Maybe somebody made it up. I mean, there are other possibilities of how this tradition got to us. One possibility is that it's true. It actually happened. That's another possibility, though. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was so charismatic that he convinced an entire nation of people that they saw and witnessed things they never saw and never witnessed, but they went along with it. Yeah, if you say so, I guess we did see it. Very improbable. It's possible. Very improbable that you can convince an entire nation they saw things and witnessed things they never saw and never witnessed. Especially, we're talking about Jews. Jews are hard enough to convince they saw things they did see, let alone what they didn't see. Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says that one of the biggest proofs that the Torah is true is that we accepted it, because we're a very stubborn people. And if it wasn't true, we never would have accepted it. So to believe that Moshe Rabbeinu could have convinced an entire nation that they saw and witnessed what they didn't see, and they were so convinced that they gave it over, passed it over, if you like puns, to the next generation, right, as if they really saw it or whatever. And that's how the tradition started, very improbable. Okay, another possibility. Nobody ever convinced them they saw things they didn't see. They made it up. The whole nation got together and they made up these fantastic stories. Why would they do such a thing? Because they were slaves in Egypt, and it wasn't so gratifying to tell their children, this is your heritage, you're the children of a bunch of slaves. So he said, yeah, we were slaves in Egypt, but you got to hear what God did for us. We're very special people. So they made up this whole miraculous past to give their children a very fine heritage. There's only one problem. They tacked on a Torah, and they demanded from their children things, supposedly, that God told them to do, which they knew they made up. Tell you the truth, if I thought that 3,000 years ago, somebody made up that you have to put little black boxes on your head and your arm at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd never do it in my life. Let them do it. Why should I do it? Because somebody made it up 3,000 years ago. I only do it because I believe that God said I should do it, and my life in this world and the next world depends on it. So I'm willing to do it. But if I thought for a minute somebody made it up, why in the world would I do it? And here are parents who know Yom Kippur, cleaning for Pesach, a million different laws, not marrying your relatives. Incest was a socially accepted thing in Egypt. And Moshe Rabbeinu's father was married to his aunt. So, and then telling them you can't get married like that. You can't eat shellfish. You can't eat treif. And they know that they made it up. It's not real. Why would they abuse their children like that and force them to do things they knew were completely not important? And even if there's abusive people, but an entire nation of them, and usually when people before they die like to tell the truth, they would have called their children and say, listen, the black boxes, Pesach, forget about it. We made it up. So very improbable that an entire nation would make this up and foist it on their children. Okay, another possibility. No one ever made it up at the time, and no one ever convinced people they saw things they didn't see. Somebody made it up 1,000 years later. Ezra. It was a rainy day, had nothing better to do. He made up the Torah. Called the people together, and he told them, I just discovered, right, this Torah that our ancestors went through Egypt with all these miracles 1,000 years ago. Again, first of all, some Jew in the back is going to raise his hand and say, Ezra, if these things really happened, how come nobody ever heard about it till now? And if it never happened, then nobody could have heard about it. Ezra was telling them something new they never heard before, but that he had discovered that this would happen 1,000 years before. Why would they believe him? Besides the fact, he also tacked on the Torah. You can't remain married to your non-Jewish spouses was one of the things. Why would anybody accept that, right, if they had any doubts that Ezra made this up? Because if they never heard about it, right, how could it have happened? So that's also improbable. The next possibility is the following. Maybe it happened, but not the way the Torah says. It happened. The Jews were working hard in Egypt, and they made a strike, and they got out. And when they got out, they jumped over a puddle, and they made up some laws, and that's what happened. But as it was told over, it got exaggerated. One generation said they jumped over a puddle. The next one said, that's not really exciting. It wasn't a puddle, it was a creek. Next one said, no, they didn't jump over a creek, it was already a sea. They went scuba diving underneath. Another generation said, no, that's not so exciting. The sea split. And that's how we heard about Kriyas Yam Suf. It's like the guy who went fishing and caught a minnow, and after telling it over a few times, it became a whale. So things get exaggerated. You ever play the game telephone? In England, they call it Chinese whispers. I don't know what they call it in South Africa. You have a line of 10 people, and you whisper something to the first person in line, and you tell them to pass it on. When you get to the 10th person in line, you ask him what he heard. It's always different than what it started. It changes. So maybe over years and years of transmission, it got exaggerated and changed. And that's how we got this tradition. Very improbable. Why? Because we're not talking about one line of tradition. We're talking about hundreds of lines of tradition, parents to children, teachers to students. Imagine if you have 100 people playing telephone, 10 lines, 10 deep, and you know that everybody in the beginning of the line heard the same message. We don't know what the message was. But whatever it was, they all were told the same message. And then we go to the 10th person in line and we ask them what they heard. And they all tell us the same thing. We don't know if it's the same thing that started, but we know that they also heard the same thing. Two possibilities. It is the same thing that started and it didn't change. Or it changed, but it changed 10 times independently the exact same way, which is more probable, the first thing. If it changed, it would have changed 10 different ways, not the same way. We're talking here about a tradition that was handed down with a lot of lines of tradition. There should have been 10, 15 versions of Kriyas Yamsuf, jumping over a creek, a puddle, scuba diving, and so on. There never was another tradition. Even the people who don't believe in the Masorah, the Karoyim, the Tzedukim, the Reform, they don't claim to have another tradition. They just claim we don't believe it. But they don't have an alternate tradition. There never was another alternate tradition. Oh, there are arguments of the details of how many paths there were by Kriyas Yamsuf, but there's no argument whether there was a sea that split. So, therefore, the most probable of all the possibilities of how this tradition got to us is that it happened, that it's true. The fact that it happened in front of an entire nation, that's what the Kuzri says. And therefore, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're supposed to remember it 1,000 times a year, every day, twice a day. Shabbos, Yontif, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. Many mitzvahs are remembrance of the exodus from Egypt. How feeble-minded did God think we were if we wouldn't remember it 1,000 times a year, that we'd forget it? Once is enough. But the idea is the more that you speak about it, and the more that you understand how reliable our tradition is because it started. The first link was something that an entire nation witnessed, like I explained. Makes it true, makes it as if you actually witnessed it. That's the first way that you fulfill in every generation. Person has to consider himself as if he personally went out of Egypt. Not that you have to feel like you were a slave and set free, but you have to believe it so much as if you can say, as if I saw it, as if I was there, I witnessed it, because intellectually I know that it must be true, because otherwise, if it's not true, how in the world does this tradition get started? All the other possibilities are improbable. So that is the first way of fulfilling this idea. If you speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim and you understand the ideas that I told you, then you'll be able to say at the end of the Seder, I know this is true. It's as if I was there, as if I witnessed it with my own two eyes. Second way. The Shurei Das, the Tozer Rosh Yeshiva, asked the following question. He says, if the Seder was meant to achieve the goal that you should feel like you were a slave in Egypt and set free that night, it's not geared for that. I mean, if somebody would ask me, I'll tell you in 1 second what he says. He says something more refined than me, but I want to make the question stronger. I'll tell you what kind of Seder I would have designed if they asked me to design a Seder whose purpose was to make you feel like you were a slave in Egypt and set free that night. My Seder would be the following. Everybody has to invite 20 people to their home Pesach night. When they come, you divide them into two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A, you give clubs and whips, and Group B, you give building materials. You take them into your backyard. You don't have to be part of Group A or B. You're the coordinator. You make the Seder. All you get is a whistle. You blow your whistle and you say, okay, for the first quarter of the night, Group A will beat Group B while they build pyramids. After a quarter of the night, you blow your whistle and you say, okay, now Group B will beat Group A as they build pyramids. At midnight, you blow your whistle and you say, you're all free, no more building, no more beating, go home, enjoy the Yontif. I guarantee you, the people at my Seder would feel like they were slaves in Egypt and set free, right? They may never come to my Seder again, but they would believe, right, that they would feel like they were slaves in Egypt and set free. Better than what God ordained. What did God say? But we want to now experience 210 years of bitterness, slavery, persecution, let's eat some lettuce. What in the world is the Rebbeinu thinking? That may make you feel like a rabbit, but what in the world, how does that make you feel like you're a slave in Egypt and set free eating some lettuce? The Shurei Das says he would have made the Seder like the Christians they'll have a passion play on Easter. They all get into a stadium at sunrise and they have a play. This guy's Yoshka and this woman is Mary, and they see him crucified and they see him get up from the dead, and it makes an impression. Today we could do it with a video that Steven Spielberg could make with all the latest technical tricks of photography. I remember I was 9 years old. I was attending an afternoon Hebrew school in New York. And the movie, The 10 Commandments, came out by Cecil B. DeMille. And before it was open to the theaters, to the public, they showed special showings to Hebrew school children. So my Hebrew school took us to see the 10 Commandments. And in the 10 Commandments, there is the reenactment of the splitting of the Red Sea with trick photography. And I remember saying to myself as a 9-year-old, if Cecil B. DeMille could split the Red Sea, then God could do it too. And it really strengthened my emunah in Kriyas Yamsuf. So we could have a video at the Seder with 3 dimensions where you could smell it and feel everything and really feel like you were there, part of it. That would achieve the purpose of a person feeling he was a slave and set free. But what was the Rebbeinu thinking? Eating lettuce? So says the Shurei Das the following. I'll tell you what he says, and then I want to couple it with something the Michtav Eliyahu says, and together it really explains how it works. The Shurei Das says the following. I'm going to give you a marshal first to what he says. Subliminal advertising. There's a way of advertising where you hit the person consciously. Have a whole spiel about drinking Coke or eating popcorn or whatever, right? And they try to convince you to buy their product. They found that there's a more potent way of advertising called subliminal. You don't give a whole spiel, but you show somebody a picture, a movie, and you splice into the movie one frame of a beautiful bottle of Coke with ice around it. You don't even see it because it goes by your eye too fast for your conscious mind to register it. But it goes into your subconscious. And they found that advertising like that is like a hypnotic suggestion. And a person has this uncontrollable urge to drink Coke. It's against the law in America to advertise like that. Says the Shurei Das, similarly, if you had a play or if you got beaten up Pesach night, you'd remember it for a week or two till you healed, and then it would dissipate. But something that goes directly into your neshama and bypasses your externals makes a much greater impression and lasts much longer. Now let me explain that, coupling it with something the Michtav Eliyahu says. The Michtav Eliyahu says that time is not a straight line. Time is like a spiral. The way I like to explain it is the following. Imagine if you have 365 elevator shafts in a circle. And these elevator shafts are very special. The elevator is very special. First, it goes around from one shaft to another, and then it goes up and around again. Those elevator shafts are time zones. The first elevator shaft in the circle was Aleph Tishrei, first day of the year. On ground level, that is the day that the first human being was created, the creation of Adam Harishon. And then he went to the second day of the year, ground level, Beis Tishrei. Third day, Gimel Tishrei, and so on, till he went around the whole first ground level year till Chavtes Elul. And then the next day, he didn't go back to ground level Aleph Tishrei. He went up one level. Now he's on the first floor, Aleph Tishrei. directly above the time that he was created, which is one floor beneath him. The memory of the creation of Adam permeates that shaft. And therefore, you're passing through that memory when you pass through it on the first level and you're above ground level. Last Rosh Hashanah, we passed through the 5,781st level of that shaft of time zone called Aleph Tishrei. And in that shaft is the memory of the creation of Adam Harishon. That's Rosh Hashanah. We pass through that memory. That's what Rosh Hashanah is. In a few weeks, we are going to pass through the time zone called the 15th day of Nisan. On the 2,448th level, the exodus from Egypt occurred. And the collective memory of that exodus permeates this time shaft, this time zone. And therefore, when we're going to pass on the 5,781st level, we're passing through the memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is permeating that shaft. We're passing through that collective memory. The only thing is we have to connect into it. So how do you connect into it? I'll give you an example. Imagine if you had a computer which had a database in its memory of everything you'd ever want to know about leopards. So you want to now transfer that memory into your personal computer. So what do? I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't shake the monitor and try to get all this information shaped into your monitor. That's all external. What you have to do is get a cable and connect the cable into the guts of the master computer and into the guts of your computer, and then the memory will transfer from the master computer into your personal computer. That is what we do Pesach night. Like the Shurei Das says, we want to get this memory transferred to our neshama directly. The cable that transfers the information about leopards does not have to be spotted. It doesn't have to look like a leopard, but it has to have the right amount of wires and the right amount of pins and the right configuration and the right size. And then it will connect into the neshama of the first computer, into the neshama of your computer, and transfer the information. Therefore, the Ribbono Shel Olam said, I don't want to transfer that information to your externals. That will not be as intense as transferring directly to your neshama. So therefore, the Ribbono Shel Olam gave us the cable. The cable is very subtle. Matzah, Maror, Korban Pesach, that is the cable that transfers the memory, the collective memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we pass through on Pesach night into our neshamas. Now, with this idea, you can answer a question that many times comes up at almost everybody's Seder. When the yeshiva bachrim and seminary girls come home, they usually come home armed with a card of multicolors showing the size of matzah you need for afikomen and for motzi matzah and how many leaves you need of moror or whatever. And they sit there with their card and they measure the matzah exactly. And inevitably somebody at the Seder, usually somebody called Aunt Matilda, right, says, what are you doing? What difference does it make? Why do you have this card? It makes a difference if the matzah is this big, that big. Just eat the matzah. Why do you have to know exactly what it's like? Would your Aunt Matilda say the same thing about the cable that transfers the information? What difference does it make how many wires there are, how many pins there are? If they're in a circle, in a square, just plug it in, it'll work. It won't. If it's not the right amount of pins, the right size, the right configuration, it won't work. If it's not the right kind of matzah, in the right amount, in the right configuration, leaning the right way, it's not going to work. It's not going to make the connection. The purpose of those mitzvahs are to charge your neshama with the memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim. B'chol dor v'dor chayiv adam liros es atzmo. It's an essential neshama level. You may not have to feel anything. If your car battery goes dead and you want to charge it up with cables, you don't see any change in the battery. If you see the battery start to get bigger and glow, run. That's not what's supposed to happen. The battery looks the same, but it's charged up. The difference is, with a charged battery, you'll start your car, and without a charged battery, the car won't start. If you've charged your neshama with the memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim, everything you do during the year is going to be different. And if it's not a charged neshama, it's not going to work. And it'll last a whole year because it goes directly into your neshama. So if you finish the Seder and are able to say, Chasal Seder Pesach Kilchaso, I fulfilled all the mitzvahs of the Seder properly, then you know that you've transferred the collective memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim into your neshama, and your neshama is charged up, and your neshama feels like you were a slave in Egypt and set free. You may not feel it at all consciously, but it's there. That's a second way, a spiritual way of fulfilling this idea. And lastly is a different way, a third way. When they translated the Torah into Greek for Talmid HaMelech, they made certain structural changes so he shouldn't have questions. One of the places they changed was the following pasuk. It says, "Moshe b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim shloshim shana v'arba me'ah shana," right? That the sojourn of the Jewish people in Egypt was 430 years. It's not true. It couldn't have been 430 years. The Torah gives us an information to know that it couldn't have been. We know that Levi was one of the people who went down to Mitzrayim. We know how long Levi lived. We know how long his son Kahas lived. We know how long his son Amram lived. And his son Moshe Rabbeinu left Egypt when he was 80. If you add the entire total lifespans of Levi, Kahas, Amram, and 80 years of Moshe, it doesn't equal 430 years. It's much less. And they didn't live concurrently. They didn't live consecutively. They lived concurrently. So you have to take off some years from each of them. So we believe that the 430 years was from Bris Ben Abisarim, from when God prophetically told Avram what would be. Well, that was 430 years from then. But the Torah says that they were in Egypt for 430 years. So they changed it, and they added the following. In Greek, they wrote, Moshe b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim v'shar arosos. The sojourn of the Jewish people in Egypt and other lands was a total of 430 years. But what do? We have the original Hebrew. It doesn't say shar arosos. It says we were in Egypt 430 years. What do we do with that pasuk? So if you look at the pasuk, I think the answer is the following. The pasuk starts in Moshe b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, the sojourn of the Jewish people in Egypt. And then it says, at the end of 430 years, we left Eretz Mitzrayim. We left the land of Egypt. Starts off with Mitzrayim, and it ends up with Eretz Mitzrayim, which has me believe the following. Mitzrayim is not a geographic place. Mitzrayim is a state of being. Min ha-meitzar korosi ko, I called God out of my narrowness. Mitzrayim is a state of being where you're narrow, constrained, constricted. You can't break out of the bonds that bind you and fulfill your potential and do what you really, really want to do. Every Jew deep down knows that what is proper to do is what God wants us to do. And our neshamas are screaming, we want to do what God wants us to do. So why don't we? The Gemara says 2 reasons. One is we have desires, Yetzer Hara, that prevent us from doing what we really want to do, and we do what we think we want to do and what we are addicted to or whatever. And Shibud Malchios, sometimes there are outside pressures that prevent us from doing what we really know is good for us and what we really would want to do and reach our potential. That status is called Mitzrayim. Min ha-meitzar karosiko. From the time of Bris Ben Abisarim, the Jewish people were narrow, constrained, and constricted. We were in Mitzrayim, but not the land of Egypt. We were in the status of Mitzrayim. At the end of 430 years, we left the land of Egypt, where we were for 210 years. That's what it means. Min ha-meitzar korosiko. If that's the case, there has to be an opposite. If I call God from my narrowness, constrained, constricted, how does he answer me? Ononi b'merchavko. He answers me with wide open. He breaks my bonds and makes me able to not be constrained and constricted and be wide open to do and fulfill my purpose and fulfill what I really want to do. So if there's a land where the status of Mitzrayim is the greatest, which was the land of Egypt, that's where it was the most decadent place. The Yetzer Hara was the strongest there. And the Shibud Malchus, the pressures, the outside pressures of slavery were the strongest. There's got to be a place in the world where the opposite is also intense. The wide open spaces. Where is that? Eretz Yisrael. You say it in benching. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Eretz Tova Urechava. Eretz Yisrael is a good and wide land. Did it never bother you? How could the Torah say Eretz Yisrael is a wide land? It's not wider than Rhode Island. I mean, somebody in Texas or South Africa should really take affront to that. What kind of wide land is Eretz Yisrael? I remember I was a tourist once in Eretz Yisrael before we moved here, 2 years before we moved here. And we were in a cab, a taxi cab, on the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway. At that time, this was 1981, there were 2 lanes going to Tel Aviv from Yerushalayim and 2 lanes coming back from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. That was the super highway of Israel, 2 lanes on each side. The cab driver was driving about 150 miles an hour, looking back at us and talking to us the whole time. I was amazed that the cab was on an automatic pilot. And he says to us, "You're Americans, aren't you?" I said, "Very perceptive. We're talking English with an American accent." He said, "Tell me, in America, they have roads as wide as this?" I couldn't resist. I said, "Yes, we do. We call them one-way streets." In any case, he never spoke to me again. What kind of wide country is Eretz Yisrael? Well, the answer is, just like Mitzrayim is not narrow, but it makes you narrow. Eretz Yisrael is not wide, but it makes you wide. So that's the status of Mitzrayim. There's another B'chol Dor Vador in the Haggadah. B'chol Dor Vador, Omdim Aleinu L'chaloseinu, V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu. Every generation has its Mitzrayim. Sometimes it's outside pressure, sometimes it's Yetzer Haras, and every individual has their Mitzrayim, that which constrains and constricts them, things that they're addicted to, pressures from the outside that prevent them from doing what they really want to do. So everybody has their personal Mitzrayim, and everybody has their personal Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that's what it means. B'chol dor v'dor chayiv adam liros es atzmo ki'ilu yotza mi Mitzrayim. It doesn't say me'eretz Mitzrayim, that you have to imagine like you were in the land of Egypt with Pharaoh building pyramids. But you have to imagine your own personal Mitzrayim, your own personal constraints and constrictions, your own personal Yetzer Haras that prevent you from doing what you really want to do deep down, the personal pressures around that prevent you. And imagine Pesach night, that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you the power to break those bonds and to work on it the whole year to be a free person. That's what you have to feel. So 3 levels I gave you. 1, intellectual. Think about the tradition that we have and make it so real as if you could say you witnessed the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's how real it is to you. Secondly, neshama-wise, charge up your neshama by doing the mitzvahs of the night properly, eating the right amount of matzah and the right kind of matzah at the right time in the right position. And then you've made the transfer from the memory, the collective memory of Klal Yisrael that exists in that time zone called Pesach night. You've transferred that to your neshama, and your neshama is charged with that memory. You may not feel it, but it's there if you did the mitzvahs properly. And lastly, emotionally. Emotionally, think about your own Mitzrayim, your own constraints and narrowness, and the constraints of your generation. and imagine that tonight HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you the ability to be free, to break those bonds, and work on leaving your own Mitzrayim. That's Ki'ilu Hu Yotzah Mi Mitzrayim, not Me Eretz Mitzrayim. And that's the pasuk. Bavur Zeh Aseh Hashem Li B'Tseisi Mi Mitzrayim, not Me Eretz Mitzrayim. So if you think about these three possibilities, you can fulfill it all three ways or any one of the ways, and you will not feel frustrated at the end of the Seder that another year went by and I didn't feel like I was a slave in Egypt and set free. If you take to heart what I told you, you'll be able in three ways to fulfill it perfectly, and that way feel uplifted at the end of the Seder that finally you were able to fulfill this mitzvah, the purpose of the Seder of B'chol Dor Vador, Chayiv Adam Liros Es Atzmo, Ki'ilu Hu Yotzah Mitzrayim. Should all have a Chag Kosher V'Sameach, and we should be able to see each other not on a screen, but in person, either in South Africa or even better, you should all come here, and Mirza Hashem Mashiach will come. You'll be able to move your shuls here, and I'll be able to see all of you and come visit you in person. Okay, this should be the year, Ki Meitzeis Chameres Mitzrayim, Arenu Niflos, and we'll all mamish not just feel like it, we will be people who are redeemed, Bevias Kol Tzedek Meheirav Yamein.
Amen. Rabbi Leff, it's what an honor for us to be able to hear your words of Torah. I was privileged to be able to be in Nele Elef and hear your words of Torah then, and many Tisha B'Av in the Moshav to hear what Tisha B'Av was really, and just to have you share your words of Torah to inspire us about Pesach. You really have given and show a derech of the Telzi Yeshiva and what that represents, and the koyach of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, which has really been something very powerful, and you've lived that, and even experiencing, you know, whether you be in the base medrash or in a soccer stadium, the Gemara is always in hand, and really we are big supporters of, you know, such a sport, but really thank you for giving of your time and your Torah to the world. And just Hashem should bless you in all that you do. And thank you for your Torah.
Amen. Thank you.